Thank you, Tomasz Shmura, Director of the Defense Track right here at the Warsaw Security Forum, for introducing our last set of industry partner presentations. Forgive me, my voice has given up on me. And of course, let's also thank Marek, Eva, and Joanna for their contributions. We are approaching the end of the second day here at the Defense Track at WSF2024, but we still have one more panel, so hold your attention because this is going to be an extremely fascinating discussion. The topic of the panel is whether Europe is able to create a credible nuclear deterrence. The context, of course, being the fact that since invading Ukraine at full scale in 2022, Russia is persistently engaged in nuclear saber rattling, most recently going as far as proposing some putative new rules that would make an attack from a non-nuclear state that was backed by a nuclear armed one to be a joint attack somehow, an obvious and apparent threat to NATO countries' nuclear powers supporting Ukraine, which obviously makes assessing Europe's ability to create a credible nuclear deterrence as urgent as ever. To moderate and to guide us through this last panel discussion, it is my pleasure to welcome to the stage the wonderful Teri Schultz, reporting from Brussels on NATO and EU affairs. And I'm a big fan, so NATO, please do, so Teri, please do join us on stage. Thank you.
Thank you so much to everyone. The music is so dramatic, it really raises the stakes here, guys. I'm expecting some serious debate here on whether Europe can create a credible nuclear deterrent. I'm Teri Schultz. As was mentioned, I have covered NATO for the last 15 years, the European Union as well, and I'm really looking forward to delving into this topic because we don't get to talk to some of these people very often. I'm talking about Jim in the NATO office. So joining me here on stage is Tobias Ellwood. He's a UK parliamentarian. Rolf Nikel, he is the Vice President of the German Council on Foreign Relations, DGAP. Guillaume Ollagnier, he's the Director for Strategic Affairs, Security and Disarmament from the French Foreign Ministry, and Jim Stokes, the Director of Nuclear Policy at NATO. So thank you very much for being here, and thank you to Warsaw Security Forum. I think all of us are very delighted to be here and enthusiastic about discussing this, as well as joining the other fantastic panels that we've seen here already at the conference. So getting started here, last week as President Zelensky was in the United States, pleading with the United States and others to give him the right to use Western-provided weapons to strike deeper into Russia, President Vladimir Putin decided to update his list of red lines. Now, if allies did give Ukraine the right to use these weapons, that's a red line for which he might use nuclear weapons. And oh, by the way, don't touch Belarus because that's a red line and we might use our nuclear weapons. So this is just, as I said, a long list of red lines that suddenly Putin says could be triggers for using his nuclear capabilities. And I just wanted, we have a fairly rational and well-educated audience here. I'd like to see a show of hands. Who here believes that Vladimir Putin that Russia would use a nuclear weapon in response to a conventional strike of any kind. Do people think that that's realistic? Do we believe him when he threatens this? Anyone? No one. No, I'm not my panel either. Guillaume, did you kind of raise your hand? No. Okay. All right, so, I mean, why is it working on President Biden then? I think that's a question that my Ukrainian friends and a lot of European countries are also asking. And I don't know if there'll be answers on this panel because nobody's here speaking for the US government. But anyway, it seems to be quite effective. So we're going to talk more about this here. I'm going to start with Tobias, whose government, whose prime minister anyway, was in Washington, talking to the United States, urging them to drop these restrictions and allow Ukraine to use Western-provided missiles despite these threats from Putin. So why is it, Tobias, that the UK doesn't seem intimidated by this, or at least as intimidated as Washington, maybe?
Well, good afternoon and thank you. Pleasure to join this panel. I think there's a bigger picture aspect that perhaps as I begin to place this war into context, because Russia is resorting to type. This is what Russia does. What we've experienced over the last 3 decades is unusual for what Russia is. They are an aggressor. If you've ever played that game Risk, the green is difficult to defend. What's the best way to defend? To attack. And if you know your Russian history, go back to Ivan the Terrible or Peter the Great, Catherine the Great, Stalin, whether they go north, south, east or west, that's what Russia does. And that's what Putin is doing as he now becomes the most powerful leader in Europe. And the question of this debate is, do we have an effective nuclear deterrent? I would take out the word nuclear. We don't even have a deterrent. We are being taken advantage of because we've become so risk averse. And I'm pleased that Britain has led the charge to be able to move that debate on. 950 days is how long this war has been going. And if you remember the debate from the very start, should we dare to send offensive weapons rather than defensive? And Britain has pushed that envelope, whether it be NLAWs, whether it be brimstone missiles, whether it be main battle tanks, whether it be training Ukrainians in Salisbury Plain, or indeed sending missiles too. We've actually pushed that forward. But Putin has smelt our timidity, has recognized how weak we've become, that we as the West, with NATO sitting behind us, cannot stand up to him. And this now debate about whether we should send Storm Shadow, Scalp, or ATACMS is another example of that. And we need to rekindle a sense of Cold War statecraft, be able to look our adversary in the eye and know how to balance that escalatory ladder, including saying, pushing back and saying we can fire at depth under international law if he's firing at range as well, and not be spooked by his rhetoric. Because we can watch that ladder, we can very carefully. And this audience here, perhaps more educated than those who are making the decisions in Congress or elsewhere, know that actually we can do far, far more than we're doing at the moment. I'd add on one final point about a president, American president leaving office. They rarely want to hand over a war that's cooking to their successor for fear that that will become their legacy. And that's why perhaps we're seeing some hesitance from the White House right now.
Just to bring in what NATO says in response to what you're saying, NATO says, well, look, we haven't seen any attacks on NATO territory, so we do have an effective deterrent, nuclear or otherwise, nuclear inclusive, I would say.
Well, the trouble with that argument is that it tells anybody that's not in a club such as NATO, get yourself a nuclear weapon. Because I'm afraid that this has been a failure in deterrence. Much as we pat ourselves on the back, and I wish Rutte all the best as he takes over, but if this is Europe, Europe's at war again. The first time really on this scale since 1945, and we're not doing enough to put the fire out. And it's part of a bigger picture of our world splintering into chaos, and we're not doing enough about it. We don't put, this isn't about, this is the other thing, this is not about Ukraine. This is about an ideology of Putin and Russia against the West, tying up with China and indeed Iran as well. We still think this is all about Ukraine. It's not, it's much bigger than that.
And the Baltic countries would certainly speak to that if they were here. And also, I mean, I'm not a NATO, I cover NATO every day. But anyway, just to remind everyone that NATO has said to each of these threats from Putin that they do not see the movements on the ground, the actual physical, logistical movements on the ground that would indicate he's serious about this. So
each time Britain has pushed that envelope, we've heard the noise, the rhetoric, the stamping up and down in the Kremlin corridors, but it's not actually led to anything. What we should be doing is actually go even further. I mentioned it this morning. We should actually be using American, British, French airplanes to take out drones and missiles, just as we did last night over Israel. The same should be done over Ukraine as well. That would be then not just reacting to events, but actually controlling the agenda.
All right, that's a strong start, Guillaume. You ready to pick up? Coming from France, I mean, President Macron, within the last few years, has spoken a bit differently about France's nuclear capabilities, about possibly sharing, about exercising together with allies. Where is the debate right now since the war began? And I mean, are the U.S. elections playing into this at all in the French debate?
No, thank you. First of all, very good to be here, and I'm very happy to participate in that panel. Just a couple of points on your question, Teri. The first is that I think it is basically a very good thing that we have this discussion here today, here in Warsaw, about European nuclear deterrence, and to be more precise on the contribution of nuclear deterrence to the overall security of Europe. I think it says a lot about how much the mindset has evolved, and I think that it is crucial because the more our views are convergent in Europe about the importance of nuclear deterrence in terms of how to ensure our security, the stronger we are. Second, I don't want, before going to the French discussion and the French proposals on that, I don't want to be ambiguous on one thing, which is that we keep thinking that obviously the cornerstone of our security in Europe is NATO, and in particular the nuclear dimension of NATO, for sure. Third, yeah, you're right. You have reminded us that President Macron has made a speech in 2020 offering to our European partners and allies which are interested in it a kind of discussion about the French contribution to the security of Europe through the French deterrent, saying and repeating, because it's not absolutely new, that there is a European dimension in the definition of our vital interest. It's not new. What was new was to offer a discussion about how to maximize the French contribution to the security in Europe. And this proposal stands. It is still on the table. We are still open to discuss bilaterally with interested partners. And I think that this proposal is more than ever useful and timely and crucial given the evolution of the context since 2020.
But has there been any movement on France perhaps rejoining the nuclear planning group at NATO? I mean, why, if you believe that there needs to be more coherence and more cooperation on nuclear capabilities, providing a stronger European pillar?
Yeah, I think it is not where we are, and it's not really the first question that we have to ask.
I waited a couple.
Yeah, you remember probably that since 1974, with the Ottawa Declaration, NATO recognized the specific contribution of the UK deterrent and the French one. One of the elements of our contribution through the French deterrent to the security of Europe is that we are an independent, different, separated center of decision in terms of the potential use of nuclear weapons, and it is by itself a contribution to the security of the continent, simply because it complexifies the calculus of the Russian authorities in case of a crisis, because there is NATO on the one hand, and Washington, of course, there is the United Kingdom, and there is France, which has separate plans, separate different doctrines, and so on. So it is a question which can be asked, but basically the question of joining a NATO planning group for France is not, nuclear planning group, is not on the table. It's not something that we think urgent nor necessary. The first thing that we want is to have a strategic discussion about how to maximize our own contribution to the security of our partners, to which we are committed, in particular because we have to bear in mind that NATO is not only about the United States protecting Europe, it is also about European countries being committed between themselves through Article 5. We are committed as friends to the security of Poland because they are a member of the European Union and because we are tightened by Article 5. So basically what we want is to have this discussion with interesting partners at the first stage.
Speaking of interesting partners, Germany, this whole debate has put some more pressure on your country, on your government, to clarify how it feels about nuclear capabilities. There have been some calls even for Germany to become a nuclear capable country. Where is that right now? How has that debate changed with Russia's full-scale war on Ukraine? And again, with the way elections are going around Europe and potentially in the United States, does that also play into this debate inside Germany?
Well, thank you very much. First of all, it feels good to be here again after being for 6 years ambassador of Germany to Poland. And the debate, of course, is absolutely timely, and we have the debate in Germany as well, not into the direction you just described, but there is a debate at least starting, which is necessary because we need that dialogue. But first of all, let me touch on the threat. Where's the threat? I think it is clear that Russia wants to coerce the whole of the West into not supporting enough Ukraine militarily. It's about spreading fear, and it's a reckless and very, very aggressive behavior which goes far beyond what we've seen in the first Cold War with the Soviet Union. So there's a new situation here. Many of the red lines that have been drawn by Russia have been crossed without any reaction.
No, I was just saying, I mean, maybe we should call them red lines with our fingers, because they have been crossed.
Yeah. In the sense of red lines in the sense of Russia. Yeah. So if for them it is clear that that they want to coerce us into not supporting Ukraine as much as we should. Of course, the Russian nuclear doctrine is ambiguous on this and can be interpreted in many different ways. So, but the real, and I would join what the colleague from Britain has said, that we should not be intimidated at all by Russian nuclear signaling. The danger of nuclear weapons being used by Russia in Ukraine or against NATO is very remote, because of the fact that, first of all, Russia thinks it's winning in Ukraine, so why use a nuclear weapon? Secondly, the consequences and American retaliation specifically would be massive and catastrophic. And thirdly, which is important for Russia as well, China is a factor in this as well and has expressed its uneasiness with the Russian positioning on this. So the use of nuclear weapons against Ukraine and against even less against NATO is very remote. So in our view right now we have a debate, and of course this debate is fueled by estimations of who would win the American elections. If Donald Trump would be president, then the situation may be different than if Kamala Harris wins. But nevertheless, the American nuclear guarantee for Europe is solid. And I think that even the nuclear doctrine, the nuclear posture doctrine of Trump of 2018 made that point even stronger. So I don't think that we have really to worry too much about what's happening, or what could happen in the US. The last point I want to make here is the most important point here is our conventional defense. And therefore it's a very good idea to station or to deploy those conventional medium-range missiles in Germany by 2026. It will be a heavy debate in Germany. We'll have elections next year, and there will be some more on this. But so far, there has not been any of the kind of things that we've seen in the 80s with 300,000 people in the streets, etc. So, from our point of view, let's concentrate first on these conventional things, and then, yes, Guillaume is right. We have to have a dialogue on this amongst ourselves. This is not for tomorrow, not even for the day after tomorrow, but we have to consider this in a broader perspective, in a longer term.
It sounds like you think that NATO's nuclear deterrent is working perfectly then, unlike Tobias.
It's not working perfectly, but it has for the last Well, since it's there, it has worked. Since 1949, that NATO has been created, and since Germany has joined in 1955, it has worked. Of course, it always has to be adapted to the circumstances, and maybe we have to do more to counter the strategic or let's say more the sub-strategic threat from Russian nuclear weapons. In Kaliningrad, the missiles can reach Berlin in 5 minutes. So maybe we have to do more on this. But this is a longer-term debate and not necessarily part of the debate with Ukraine right now. Thank you.
So why mess with it, right, Jim? You just need to steer the ship. I mean, this is, not everyone is so reassured, and when threats come up and they do rattle people, especially on nuclear weapons, you and I discussed this, everyone's like, well, what is NATO going to do? So, I mean, what is NATO going to do?
It's a good question, and you actually talked about sort of two aspects of how I look at my mission set. I mean, when we talk a lot about nuclear deterrence, it is really thinking about how we're affecting the calculus of a potential adversary. And in this case, we are very much focused on what Russia is doing, what it's saying. We look at its posture and its capabilities. But there's also the aspect of the assurance part of our mission. So how do we reassure almost 1 billion people that we're protecting within the alliance, now 32 nations that are a part of NATO? And that's an interesting aspect of what we need to do there, because it's different ways that we need to communicate to different audiences, both how we're communicating to the Kremlin, but how we're also communicating to our own publics. What are the measures that we're taking, some of which we can be very open about and demonstrate our capabilities, and some things we do behind closed doors and we're not able to talk about because it's classified or it's sensitive. I'd say from a nuclear deterrence perspective, I would agree with Rolf. 75 years of NATO as an alliance, it's 75 years of NATO as a nuclear alliance. We have not been attacked by nuclear weapons. In fact, we haven't been attacked by another nation. So I'd say if that's the definition of success, it has been working. I think to Tobias's point, it's a different question if it's about has our deterrence worked for other situations, but I think in terms of a NATO context, it has worked. And where we are right now, we are in the process of modernizing our nuclear capabilities. All 3 allied nuclear powers have been doing that for a number of years. They're spending billions of pounds and dollars and euros to modernize their capabilities, and the other allies are doing that as well. We're transitioning our dual-capable aircraft to F-35As, the most capable fighter jet in the world. The Netherlands made that transition in June of this year. That strengthens our overall set of capabilities, and I'd say our posture as well. And then the other thing is, it's not just about our nuclear capabilities. It is about the conventional capabilities. It's how the allies are investing in long-range fires, missile defense capabilities, air-to-air refueling, all the things that we need for conventional defense, which we can also call upon if we ever need to conduct a nuclear mission. Those investments in those conventional capabilities make us look very formidable to Russia. I don't think that Russia is going to wake up one morning and decide it would be a good idea to go and attack NATO when they can see how the allies are spending funding. We have 22 allies that are at the 2% mark, some of that are beyond that. Thank you, Poland. And I think we need to invest more money because we need to provide the capabilities to shape as it's going through that planning process so that we're ready from a defensive perspective, and then that has a deterrent quality.
And has that raised questions about whether there should be other countries brought into the nuclear sharing agreement, that you might want to station nuclear weapons in more countries than is currently the case? Eastern allies have raised their hand, I believe.
It's certainly something that's come up within the public domain, and I think it's good that we have a healthy debate across our societies about what our posture should look like, what our policies should be, what our key principles are. And it's important that we have an informed dialogue about this, because certainly in other nations, they're not able to have these sort of discussions. And then again, within the NATO context, even within the nuclear planning group, we have 31 allies. We have to have consensus on these decisions. And so I think within the nuclear domain, it's important that we consider the views of all the different allies. We're going to move perhaps a little bit more slowly than we do on the conventional side, because these are really important things that we need to consider. I think from my perspective, we absolutely should look at what the political and the military benefits would be of adjusting our posture here within Europe, or expanding the number of nations that are participating in the nuclear sharing arrangement. So providing those aircraft that can be certified for a nuclear mission, or potentially hosting US nuclear weapons. But again, there's a number of different things that the Allies can do and actually are doing on the conventional side, how they support our nuclear exercises, such as Steadfast Noon, which is coming up later this month, our annual nuclear flying exercise. And even having this kind of debate publicly, I think, really helps to work on the other part of deterrence that's absolutely vital, which is our political will, our resolve, how our leaders are going to make certain decisions and act in a crisis situation. So we need to have these types of discussions, I think.
And so can you say that the war in Ukraine has shaped the debate, though? For example, even putting out a press release on Steadfast Noon would not have happened in the early days of me covering NATO. You didn't talk about the nuclear exercises because you thought even that would be escalatory, to even say you're practicing, which everybody knew, but you just didn't talk about it.
I think that is, I mean, from my perspective, I started working at NATO headquarters in February of 2022, and so it's, I wasn't there in previous years when perhaps it was a little bit more politically sensitive to talk about nuclear deterrence. From my perspective, the allies are very supportive of what we're doing. I would say all 32 allies. We work very closely with France on a number of issues and consult with them closely as one of our allied nuclear powers. And I'm pretty confident that we can support our nuclear mission if we need to do that, both from a capabilities perspective, but also that political will, how we can make those consensus decisions. There are some important issues that we need to continue to discuss. We need to look at how we can adapt to this environment and where we need to go. And then the coherence part of it, so between the conventional and the nuclear side, make sure we have a good understanding of these issues. We understand those escalation dynamics that could come into play between NATO and Russia, and then how we need to address that.
Very interesting. So I definitely want to bring questions in from the audience. I'm going to let my panelists address each other if there's anything else that you would want to bring up from each other's comments. Tobias, you grabbed your mic a couple times.
I'm really curious to see whether the France is going to encourage Scalp to be used, and Germany, whether Taurus is going to happen, because I do agree that we should prepare ourselves, whoever wins in America, because what we're seeing is a headache developing in Ukraine that is not going to go away. If we don't deal with Ukraine today, the problem with Russia will only get bigger. So Scalp and Taurus, are we likely to see those slid across the table anytime soon?
Okay, I'm going to take the first three hands that I saw, and we'll see how much time we have left. We have 10 minutes and 50 seconds, and I've been told that we really need to keep our time. Okay? Here, please introduce yourself and make your questions short so that we can get answers. And then here in the middle was one.
My name is Stephen McKelvey. I'm from Kennesaw State University. I'm always telling my students that practice makes perfect, and so I'm surprised that NATO thinks one annual exercise a year, Steadfast Noon, once a year, and we're supposed to exude confidence, and I wish you would comment on this. My belief is that when Russia's being so belligerent, we should have multiple nuclear exercises each year, not just one.
So you're asking them if they need them, or you're making a comment,
I'm asking
Steve?
if they agree with
you.
asking them to explain why NATO believes it should only be one.
Fair enough. Okay, one here. Yes.
Thank you very much. Michał Miarka, Deputy Representative of Poland to the UN in New York and freshly expired head of NATO Liaison Office to the UN. Political deterrence and political credibility. From the New York perspective, we are not necessarily 10 feet tall when it comes to convincing the world, wider world out there, to our values and our positions. And we are quite vocal on Ukraine. If we don't deliver on supporting Ukraine and making it win, how does it impact our political credibility and ability to politically deter our opponents?
Is that to the nation, I mean, I guess national representatives, or to everybody? Okay, and there was one over here. Yes. Robert. No, I can't see.
Thank you, Robert. Robert Shell, Center for Eastern Studies and formerly NATO. I was tempted to ask a question about strategic ambiguity as a French input. To what extent it sort of confuses the adversary, but also to some extent the allies. But I just asked it, but ignore it. My question that I would like to ask is basically about nuclear sharing. I understand all the restrictions on sort of getting into the nitty-gritty of the way, but nevertheless, this issue of timing, I mean, we are dealing with unprecedented risks, and part of the challenge is to be really, really convincing. And frankly, some changes in the nuclear posture, including the nuclear sharing, seem to be at least on paper, the low-hanging fruit as far as that equation is concerned. So I would like to ask the panelists their thoughts, what could be perhaps done in the more immediate future rather than sort of long-term perspective. Thank you.
Okay, so taking those three questions, do we need more exercises? What are the impact if we don't win in Ukraine? Summary. And Robert's question on nuclear sharing. I mean, we only have 8 minutes, so if we just work back through the panel, starting with Tobias, and take a couple of minutes and sum up your thoughts on these, please.
It's a very profound question, whether or not the West, those who support the Bretton Woods, the current rules-based order, are in any position to tell any authoritarian state how to go. But Russia is a threat. Ukraine is threatened. We still haven't got clarity what victory looks like, and I stressed before, it will not stop there. This additional aspect of the nuclear button is something we absolutely need to be concerned about, particularly the low-yield nuclear tactical weapon is something, again, we've actually not considered. But I'd add to that, what value would Russia bring by going down that route? It would alienate India as well as China as well. There'll be bigger political ramifications for going that way. And we need to make it very, very clear that there would be severe consequences if we actually opened up that particular Pandora's box. So I understand why people are concerned about this, but as I say, we need a more robust approach in standing up to the threat that if we don't sort out today, is going to grow way beyond Ukraine to other parts of Eastern Europe.
And as coming from a nuclear country, would you say that there should be more exercises, more discussion of exercises in the NATO context, or?
Well, I'm going to yield to Jim to go on that. I haven't got a problem having served in uniform with NATO. The NATO operations do things very, very well. It's been mentioned here before. It's the political backbone that we're missing to look after. It's the utility of force of what we do. And the fact that the club looks after the club is fine. But what happens outside the membership of the club, that's what's concerns. And this is Europe. It's against its war on Europe. 950 days, and we've not put that war out yet.
Rolf?
Yeah, maybe I address first the question about Taurus, yes. I happen to be in charge of a think tank in Germany called German Council on Foreign Relations, who has come out for delivering a Taurus. Unfortunately, we're not the only one. And unfortunately, we have a chancellor who still believes that it is not the right decision to take now. Well, we'll see how this goes. I can assure you, my think tank is doing everything to trying to convince the chancellor specifically, because the foreign ministry is much more forward-leaning and even
Pistorius as well. Yeah.
Much more forward.
And Minister Pistorius as well.
Sorry?
And Minister Pistorius.
Yeah, that's what I'm going to add, and Minister Pistorius as well. So, anyway, on our credibility, yes, of course, it's at stake. In political credibility is at stake, but one should also not forget the danger, the risk is remote. It's not inexistent. And whatever we do has to be calculated in a sensible manner, and that's why I think every decision that has to be taken on the merits of that decision at that specific moment. And yes, Taurus would have been much better if the decision had been taken much earlier. But that is the important point, and not, I would say, sort of a general assessment that doesn't lead very far.
Guillaume?
On the scalp question asked by Tobias, just a few elements. First, our line is quite clear, and President Macron has made it very clear consistently many times that we have too many red lines and that we don't win wars with red lines, and that our position is that one. Second, on scalp, it is something that we discuss bilaterally with our Ukrainian friends from an operational point of view. Third, we think that it is an important debate, I mean, lifting or not restrictions on the use of that kind of weapons, but honestly, we don't see the merits of having that debate publicly, and we think that it is something which is better to deal with behind closed doors. And just to come back on that question, broader questions of red lines, and how should we afraid or not by Russian red lines? First, we have never been afraid. I mean, nobody has been afraid. If you look back at what we have done since the beginning of the war and where we come from where we come from the beginning in terms of military assistance in scope and volume, it's very clear that we have never been afraid. The question is not, are we afraid or not? The question is to find at any moment the right path, the appropriate path between being afraid by the red lines and ignoring two blatantly red lines, which would be irresponsible. And the fact is that we have been quite successful since the beginning of the war in terms of assessing very adequately and properly what are our margins of maneuver between real and fake red lines. And that is the crucial point, not being afraid, not ignoring systematically, but assessing what is in our interest stage after stage.
Jim?
I think to the question about exercises, it's a good question to ask. I mean, our annual flying exercise, Steadfast Noon, we're able to show the proficiency in conducting our mission. We have other exercises that are conventional in nature that we can also leverage. And so our allied military forces are preparing for a lot of different types of scenarios, and even conventional exercises, we can show that proficiency. What we're not going to do is what Russia has done, which is holding out-of-cycle nuclear exercises, including using those to justify a force buildup before they invade a sovereign nation. And so that's not what NATO does. We're a responsible nuclear actor. We're going to conduct our exercises the same way we always do them because that's prudent and we think it's a responsible way to operate. I think to Robert's question about the nuclear sharing arrangements, and again, should those evolve, I think it's a good question that we need to consider within the alliance. It's something that we need the allies to be discussing, but there are other things we need to discuss as well. I mentioned the investment in conventional capabilities, the coherence we need on that side of it. There is a lot of work that we're doing to update our nuclear software, if you will. Not something that we typically talk about publicly, but we've updated our core nuclear policy document. We are working through nuclear planning. We're thinking through our own decision-making processes, how we consult with each other, both within a NATO context at headquarters in Brussels, but also between the capitals. We're constantly looking at how we can raise the nuclear IQ. We need to consider that if we get into a potential crisis or a conflict with Russia, it would be fundamentally different from the war that it's waging against Ukraine right now. We have to understand what those dynamics would be and how we could be prepared for it. We have to think through those situations. Preparing our leaders for that so they can effectively make those decisions in that moment and consult with each other and make consensus decisions is really where I think that we need to continue to place a lot of effort, and it is where we're doing. So the capability side of it is absolutely critical. We need that for credibility, but it's also the political will and ensuring that at 32 nations, we can consult with each other and figure out how to respond to different situations and to be able to shape them.
Well, I think following on from that, it is part of reassuring publics and also helping to make leaders more conversant about these questions, to have debates just like this. I cover NATO every day, and we don't have a lot of discussions like this. So I'd like to credit WSF for having this panel and allowing us to discuss this, and really would encourage that we talk about it more so that people understand the stakes of both inaction and action, having red lines and crossing red lines. So thank you very much to my very competent panelists, and we stayed on time. And thank you to our audience for being here with us. Thank you.